All right. Hey, what's up? Today's video is about Nano PE. So that's like kind of buying and selling companies that are under $1 million in value. And weirdly, I've actually been on both sides of it. When I was about 19, I started an app company that sold $3 million in software. We got 10 million downloads. We sold it for $500,000 when I was 24, and I got to pocket about half of that. So I went through this whole process as a seller, putting together the prospectus, talking to a lot of buyers, doing that whole negotiation piece. Weirdly now at 32, actually bought a company with a group of startup founders as a syndicate. They invested, I'm operating, and we bought this one after looking at a series of different assets. So what this video is going to be about is what I wish I'd known when I was younger, what kind of things I would have looked for, how I would have operated my own business differently, and then kind of like some of the signals that I've noticed over the course of doing this. The first thing I want to go through, or actually, I won't do it that way. I'll just do it this way. So let's just go through kind of like the things that we're going to cover, and then we'll go into some more detail in a little bit. So the first thing is going to be price. If you're someone who hangs out on Hacker News, you're listening to a lot of startup podcasts, and you're going to be selling your company for under $1 million, you're probably thinking about price in a pretty fucked up way. Like you're probably reading a lot about all these teams, the values of teams, the value of technology, and all that. But if you're selling for under $1 million, no one gives a shit. Like the fact of the matter is that if you're selling for under $1 million, there isn't the room to continue having kind of full-time staff. Like otherwise, the price would be a lot higher. So you're not going to be able to have a big staff, and like all the really cool technology is going to be mostly operating costs because you and maybe a co-founder have been full-time on this thing, and to be able to transfer that to a new owner, that's a lot of risk. So there's a lot of things we should be thinking about in terms of emphasizing your net profit instead of all the really cool stuff that you might be doing that isn't going to help you in this kind of sale. The other one's going to be risk. Like, what are the things that scare the shit out of potential buyers? Like team size, technical risk, failed experiments that are kind of matching what some of the default plans would be for a buyer of an asset. So those are all going to be things to look at. Opportunity, lack of paid acquisition, lack of trials, potential for introducing new pricing models. The When you're looking at the opportunity as a buyer, in a weird way, like some of the things that you haven't tried yet are actually like really beneficial. Like that's really some of the things that are exciting is like if you can have a narrative of, okay, these guys built the product and it has strong retention and it has strong engagement, but they never did paid acquisition. That's actually really cool, right? Or if you did paid acquisition and it was just really, really dumb. Like I looked at an app and it was pretty successful. And they were making a decent amount of money, but like everything about the paid acquisition was dumb. It wasn't being updated very often. The way the keywords were structured was dumb. The way the landing pages were dumb. The way the bidding was dumb. And it was awesome because like every single time I saw another thing that was dumb, I got more excited because of the buyer hat on. That's all free money and low hanging fruit. And that just meant it was gonna be like an easy ROI. So leaving some opportunity open for the buyer and then being able to point at that in a way that makes sense and has a narrative that makes sense and doesn't sound bullshitty and throws up red flags. Other one would be just metrics that matter, making sure that you're able to express your metrics in a way that feels standard, that feels focused on what the opportunity is, and is just going to read well. Like it's bizarre how many prospectuses just have the most idiotic metrics. It's so dumb. Like you would not believe how terrible most prospectuses have. Because like first off, when you're selling for under $1 million, it's not worth that much time for a banker to go through and clean it up. So that just means it's just not going to get much spit and polish. Second, when you're selling a company for under $1 million, like chances are like the metrics like weren't that great to begin with, which means that you probably weren't tracking some of the right stuff, or some of the instrumentation wasn't that clean, or some of the data is a bit of a clusterfuck. And like any of those things might make it so that you're not able to communicate the numbers around your business in a way that makes sense to the buyer and feels standard. So like often what I found is that when you're starting to look at a company, even when you're receiving data from the seller, it doesn't really feel that dependable because it's queries being run on the fly. These don't feel like these were like operational metrics, and there's just so much one-off crap going on that like you're applying a fuzz factor where it's like, okay, like this is being done as a one-off. Maybe the numbers are wrong. Maybe there's a mistake here. Maybe there was just a mistake in the SQL by accident. It's like nothing nefarious. It's just being done as a one-off, and it wasn't like an operational number that these founders were living day in and day out for a long period of time, which means like, is it accurate? Like, well, maybe, but like, let's just kind of assume a 30% fuzz factor and think that they're going to be worse than they are. So another one would then just be simple things that improve your value to acquirers. Like there's probably just going to be like some things on the table that you can do from a business standpoint that just makes it feel like a cleaner business, that makes it feel like a safer business. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk through. Okay, so first, let's talk about price. So when I was 24, like the app that we were doing, the series of apps, it was called FreeBooks. The company was Spreadsong. We have an awesome team, and we had like an awesome bunch of apps. Like we had like 1 million monthly active users. We were making like $50,000, $60,000 a month, which was like awesome. And then we had a team of about like 5 or 6 guys. So I mean, it was going really, really well. And then there was an iOS App Store update, which totally changed the search algorithm and completely nuked our revenue from 60,000 down to 20,000. At the time, there was all these rumors of a huge redesign coming, which turned into that whole flat redesign in iOS, whatever. And looking at that with my co-founder, we made the decision that we should sell because we were going to have to do a lot of really expensive updates for whatever the new design language was. And every single year, we've been looking at Apple getting more and more editorial with the App Store. And as it became more editorial, it didn't matter if you were able to outcompete your competitors. We always were able to outcompete our competitors. Like if it was about search, we would do it on search. If it was about app quality, we would have better reviews. Like it's just like we had confidence in an open market competition. But as it became editorial and as more and more of the real estate of the App Store was being sucked up by these promotional slots, we just didn't have that confidence that we were going to continue to be able to compete. So we made the decision to sell. And the thing is that we had a really big team and we hadn't established that the business could continue being as profitable with a smaller team. And a big part of this was that we were trying to figure out how we could have a landing and an acquirer that would take the whole team. And at one point, we're even talking to an acquirer that expressed interest in the whole team. The problem was that acquirer was basically taking us for a ride and trying to learn about the space. So when we did sell it, it was the worst of all worlds. We got a worse price, and the team didn't go with the acquirers, so everyone lost their jobs, and it was just kind of shitty all around. And it's not like a good set of feelings to have when you're having what should be a pretty exciting thing, which is selling your business. So the thing that we should have done is first off, when we made this decision to sell, we should have also made the decision to make it a year process where we were going to cut the costs to the absolute fucking bone. We were going to make it so that payroll was as low as we could get it, that customer service was as low as we could get it, that server costs were as low as we could get it, and minimize the amount of changes to the apps, right? And when there were changes, make sure there was tools that anyone with an IQ above 13 would be able to use with no technical risk, right? Very carefully log what are the times that we're making changes and what are we doing to do those, because we have our gross revenue. In that case, it was 20,000. And like, we were feeling pretty crap about that because it was 3 times higher just a couple months ago. And what we should have then done was figure out how we can get the monthly costs down to $3,000 or $4,000 a month. So that would have meant, like, as founders, stop paying ourselves salaries. Instead, pay ourselves an hourly rate for work actually done. And second, like, stop forward development. Once the decision to sell has been made, then if you're spending a lot of money on application development to try to improve revenue, like, what are you doing? Right? Like, why do you care? You've made the decision to sell. This is no longer a growth opportunity. What you're trying to do is make it so that your net revenue is as high as it can be, because you are not going to be valued on your gross revenue. That 20,000 number that I was focused on doesn't matter. No one cares. What they care about is what's the profit, right? And if we'd been able to have an $18,000 a month profit, then that would have been a much better exit, right? And so we would have been able to get $800,000. We would have been able to get $750,000 instead of $500,000. But by continuing to have the entire team, by not taking the steps to reduce salary into hourly rates, and then kind of not going through and simplifying the business and giving buyers more confidence that they would be able to carry it over, we really hurt the value that we could get. Because fundamentally, if you're a generally flat business or it's kind of like growing ish, then you're going to be looking at like 2.5 to 3x. If it's growing, you're going to be looking at 4x. And below $1 million on these marketplaces like FE International, where people are not buying it for strategic reasons, they're just buying it because they like money and they have money and that they're going to spend money on your thing and then it's going to make them money and they have enough that they're going to hold it over 3 years. They're going to make profit. Right. And chances are, especially when they're buying it for like under that and there's a large audience, they're going to throw up a paywall or they're going to increase the ad load. Right. Like it just, that is what it is. So be realistic about it going in and make sure that you're able to optimize for your net profit instead of your team size. And you can just get a better price. So that's the most important thing and probably the biggest thing we screwed up. And also the thing I see a lot of people screwing up when looking at a lot of these prospectuses. Next is just risk. So, not only does a large team make it so that you're going to get a worse price, it also makes it so there's more risk. Because if there's a big team and you're thinking about it as a buyer, like managing teams is complicated. There's like a lot of dynamics. Like it's hard to sell a team on a new strategy or a change in the product. And especially if you have a close-knit team that's been around forever, are they going to fit with the new strategy? Are they going to be excited about the new direction? Are they going to be turned off by the new direction? Are they going to immediately start looking for new jobs? It gets really complicated. And in a lot of these cases, like someone who is like a long-term customer service employee, like they're important to the continuity because you want them to be able to be the voice of the customer to let you know when you're about to do something dumb, to be able to help define like have continuity in the brand. And if you have a really big team, then some bunch of them leave, you're kind of in trouble. And also if there's more team and there's just more moving pieces, especially at a deal size under 1 million, that means that you're probably eating up a lot of the gross revenue with payroll, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So you really want to be like reducing that down as a way of reducing risk for the buyer. And then the other one is technical complexity. So from a technical standpoint, if the product is very complex, or if it requires a lot of editing, or if your deploy process is manual edits or live files, and you don't have you don't have continuous deployment or continuous integration, those are all risk factors. If there's when you deploy configuration changes, if those are done manually instead through an admin panel, that's a risk. So I think it's like when you think through like from a buyer standpoint, like what are all the ways I could potentially screw this thing up? A lot of those go through technical pieces like screwing up a deploy, highly manual email processes, unsubscribe lists that are done in a manual way and introduce like the risks of messing it up. Those are all just risky things, and they're pretty easy for you to fix, especially if you kind of get a head start on it. Um, for an opportunity standpoint, though, like to kind of switch gears, like if we're going to think about it from a signals of an opportunity, what are the things that make it seem to a buyer that there might be a there? Um, there's a lot of there's a lot of things that you can create the narrative of what buyers want to see, right? You can try to focus on the things that buyers are going to want to see, and then you can keep good logs of what types of changes you're making so that when the buyer asks, as like I did to every single customer, to every single buyer, like a seller we analyzed in every single asset, when was the last time you made a change, right? What was it? How long did it take? How much expertise was involved, right? Because as a buyer, what you're wondering is like, how hard is it going to be to take this thing over? And the simpler the edits, the less often you're doing major changes, the better, right? Because not only is that less cost because you have to pay developers less, it's also less risk. So first one would be strong metrics despite a lack of updates. So like one of the things that's really great, and this is something that I see quite a bit on like FE International when looking at different assets, that you have some apps that they have like pretty strong metrics despite a lack of updates. And that might mean that it's like flat or like flat and a little bit up, right? But like as long as it's like strong and like the retention isn't going down, the monetization is staying the same. That's pretty awesome because if you're looking at that thing as a buyer, you're looking at no updates and it's staying that stable. like you're just kind of seeing that there's a pretty good product loop that's been figured out. Like their emails probably don't suck that much. There's probably like enough good things there that's a pretty stable business, and you can keep that pretty much the same. And you at least have the option of holding it for 3 or 4 years and just getting your profit just by holding it, as somebody's buying it at a 3 or 4x multiple. So that's one. Strong retention is another. If you have like a low retention as an app, like obviously it's catastrophic no matter what. But like, let's say that you had like a lot, you've really figured out paid acquisition, but like the user retention is terrible. There's a lot of apps like this because there's a whole fad right now of spam apps on the App Store, with really aggressive paywalls and weekly billing. That's extremely sketchy. That's a whole different video. And what you see with those is that they have paid acquisition figured out. They have a really strong onboarding. They have a great conversion to trial. And then the entire thing immediately melts the fuck down as soon as someone actually uses the product because the product's not good. So when you have that kind of case, that's a huge turnoff because it's clear they figured out a lot of stuff. But like as a buyer, like paid acquisition is like that's if you have great retention, if there's a clear segment of users that really enjoy the product, if you kind of know if the demographic's been figured out already, like you go down the list of stuff and like you kind of have a feel for like what seems like a paid acquisition model would work, based on kind of what like the revenue looks like and what the usage patterns look like. Um, but if the product retention isn't there at all and like no one's continuing to use it, you're just kind of building on a leaky foundation, a pretty shitty foundation. So strong retention is like really one of the most important things to see. And if there isn't strong retention, then you probably want to be like a lead gen model or something where your entire model is based on basically just like reselling that user immediately, so you're making money on the same day that they come in. Otherwise, just it just doesn't make a lot of sense, and it just reads as risk, risk, risk. Um, Lack of detailed instrumentation and metrics. This is kind of like dual sided because it's like when you're looking at an asset and it's hard to answer basic questions about the cohort reports or about like ARPU by kind of like segment, and you're having a hard time getting that information out. It also indicates that there's a big opportunity because there hasn't been a disciplined product process around improving the key numbers that matter. So it is dual sided because at the same time you want to have that confidence when you're looking at the prospectus and we were kind of like just talking about it with the sellers that that you have that the numbers that you're receiving are accurate, but it's also good to have the upside of knowing that there hasn't been a disciplined product process, or way that's meant that's data based. So I think from a narrative standpoint, it's really something to think about. A lack of price testing, that's a great indicator that the price is probably wrong. A lack of cohort reporting, it's a great indicator that there hasn't. Well, let me change what I'm saying in real time. I think that a lack of price testing is great because it communicates to the seller that you don't know what you're doing from a pricing standpoint. And if the business is profitable and you have like high margins, that just indicates there's a big opportunity there. That's great. So if you haven't done price testing to date, and let's say you were to go out and do a bunch of tests and you didn't come up with anything, that would super suck because now that upside is no longer there for the seller, and they don't have that mental narrative of how they're going to get a win. Um, on the other hand, with cohort reporting, um, if a buyer asks if your cohorts are stable, that's really good from a buyer standpoint, right? So if I'm like kind of going in and I'm looking and like users from August 2020 and August from like from users from August 2019 have the same kind of retention rates and they have the same ARPU and they have like the same kind of conversion activation, the same invitation rates and that kind of thing. That's really nice because now I'm seeing that like sure like revenue is stable, but now I'm actually seeing that the user experience is stable. And that kind of gives me like very warm fuzzies from like a stability of the asset perspective. So I think that's how I think about that. And then the other would be feature development that just wasn't focused on things that had math behind it. Because like if you're looking at a series of different assets, and some of them tried really bold changes in the model or really aggressive different things with invitations. And it's like, there's one I remember looking at like this, and they tried a lot of very aggressive different things and they didn't work, right? It was actually like it was like that actually was a big red flag, and it seemed like it still might be worth it because there was a big paid acquisition opportunity, and the conversion optimization wasn't very good. But like it was a red flag that they tried a lot of smart things and they hadn't worked, right? Um, Whereas when you look at something and there hasn't been a lot of feature development, or there hasn't been enough cycles from the owners to make the improvements they wanted to make, or the app had a lot of changes early on, and when it had a lot of changes, it was improving, and then when it kind of went when the changes stopped being as regular as more maintenance mode, like all of those narratives are really good, because all of them say there's a lot of opportunity here. And because you're a buyer and you're walking around looking to buy something, and you probably think you're smarter than you are, hi, I'm Colin, um, then you're going to think that you're going to be able to find those opportunities and make them work. And that's your upside. So that looks really good as a buyer. Um, and let's see, I think another would be um, when you are actually buying it, there's like a few things that you're going to want to be able to do quickly after buying the asset to have like a quick turnaround time. And I think that some of these actually would be well worth doing ahead of time. Um, One of them is just kind of like getting onto like a clean event analytics stack. So like integrating segment, making it so that the buyer would be able to send the event stream to any marketing tools that they wanted, or to stay with your current ones. But like if you're using segment instead of like some homegrown thing, now you're making it so you can tell the buyer, not only have you set this up, not only is the instrumentation dependable, not only can they go into Redshift and run some SQL queries themselves during diligence, but actually you're going to be able to turn on any other marketing tool that you prefer with no development cycles. Like, hallelujah. All right. Fuck yeah. And the thing that's crazy is like no one's done that. I haven't seen like a single prospectus of someone that's on segment. So like part of any purchase is going to be fixing the analytics stuff by moving on the segment. Similarly, from an email marketing standpoint, having it be on customer IO or having it be on active campaign, just like some professional tool for marketing automation, because so far, it's almost all hard coded emails that I've seen, and all everything that has like a lot of transactional messages, and that's just really scary as a buyer because you're gonna have to be like editing code and making an actual server deploy just to change an email template. That's risky and it doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think by making that change early, so you're able to migrate those templates and migrate over to customer IO, migrate over to segment. Now what you're doing is you're making it so the buyer has both has less technical risk, but also they can immediately hit the ground running by making some of these improvements that they want to make. Right? If they think your emails suck, and they're probably going to think your emails suck, then they're going to be able to just immediately start making those changes once they buy it, and that's going to be like really nice to see. Similarly, from an event analytics standpoint, if you already have amplitude or mix panel set up coming out of that segment stream, now as a buyer, you're immediately going to be instrumented. So instead of needing to like waste a month or month and a half trying to like get your arms around the data and make sure you actually know what's going on, now you actually have that from day one. I think that'd be like just really strong from a buyer standpoint. Another would be just like reducing technical risk, and again, continuous integration, continuous deployment. Use GitHub, make it so you can deploy off of branches on GitHub, make it so you can do rollbacks, make it so you have a separate staging and development environment, make it sort of separate databases, like document how all that stuff works. Like just like don't leave like thermonuclear landmines everywhere on the technical side. And it's going to look really good. Like compared to like any feature thing you're going to do to try to improve your price, like chances are it's not going to work, right? Like most tests don't work. But if you integrate implement CI or CD, like guaranteed it will sketch buyers out a hell of a lot less. Um, and then the last thing is going to be um, just really thinking about this from the standpoint of starting to treat yourself as a contractor and less of a founder, because now that you've made the decision to sell, um, you need to start tracking your hours on the business. And because you yourself as a founder value your time at a relatively low amount, right? Like you're in a business, you're going to be selling for under $1 million. That means your business makes under like a quarter million or less net. It's unlikely that you're making more than 70 or $80,000 a year as the founder of this thing. Therefore, you're not valuing your time at a very high hourly rate. Um, and that means that there's things that you can do to de-risk your sale and try to set yourself up for a faster sale, for better liquidity, for a better price, by just kind of like lowering the risk on a bunch of these different things. So, you know, just throw some time at it. Create a list of what are the different things that you can do to improve your net by increasing the margins, by automating the scary technical components, by documenting things, and just kind of really just like put in the time to create a professional handover of the asset. And I think what you'll find is that, especially because people that are selling under a million, like again, it just these prospectuses are not getting a lot of love because you're taking the time to start thinking about this a year ahead of time, 6 months ahead of time, 9 months ahead of time before you list, you're going to be in a much better position to have one of the cleanest prospectuses that's on the market for some site like FE International or App Business Brokers. And then also, the brokers are going to probably be reaching out to potential buyers even more aggressive in your behalf just because you're presenting such a professional front. So that's really, I think, really the things that come to mind. If this is useful, let me know. And any questions, ping them in the comments. And then if there's any of these things that you think I should dive in more detail, let me know. Definitely like the video, because apparently when you do a YouTube video, you're supposed to do like some like and subscribe thing at the end. So like and subscribe. And then also go to thebeam.fm and then throw your email in there, and then I'll shoot some stuff around every once in a while. Thanks a lot for listening, and hopefully you sell your business for an ass ton of money. All right, cheers.